back into Peter the Disciple, and we are on part 6. Our primary passage is going to be in John chapter 13, and we're going to focus on verses 6 through 11. But we're going to cover a little bit more than that. And I wanted to show, I don't know if you are interested in this. I showed this last time I was behind the pulpit. And so today, from now until January, yes, we're coming into the new year soon, isn't it? Okay, so today we're covering Peter the Disciple, part 6. Then next week I will have a Thanksgiving message, and it's titled Make People Thankful of You. And so if you want to know what that means, you'll have to be here next Sunday. And then I'm going to go into a Christmas series, the Names of Christmas, part 1, 2, and 3. And the Christmas message might actually be the Names of Christmas, part 4. I'm still working that out. We will have a New Year's message. And then January 4th, we'll finally be back to Peter the Disciple. We have about, I think, 3, maybe 4 more after this, because there's a lot to Peter the Disciple. Okay? So again, Peter the Disciple, part 6. Okay, before we read this passage, and I'll tell you right now, this passage we're going to be reading is the foot washing passage, where Jesus washes the disciples' feet. And I want to bring out 3 points of Jesus' washing the disciples' feet, because we're only going to focus on one of them today, because you could spend some good time in this passage. And like I said, I'm trying to keep things in scope of where I'm going, and we're talking about Peter. And sometimes that's really hard when you're in the in the Gospels to only talk about Peter, okay? But so we're focusing on the Peter aspect of this. So one of the points about Jesus washing the disciples' feet is Jesus showed his humility as an example. And when you think about that, one of my favorite verses about the humility of Jesus is in Philippians 2:8. I like that whole section, but it says, "And being found in the appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even the death of the cross." Pick this to point out, even though we're going to be in the foot washing passage, it's Jesus' last night on earth before he makes that obedience to death to the point of, on the point of death, the death of a cross. And so he humbled himself, and think about it, leaving your throne in heaven to put on a man suit and walk this earth and then die when you are the creator of everything. And that's what Jesus did. And so that's very humbling when you come to that aspect. And we're going to see how low and how humble Jesus really was in this passage. Also, Jesus showed us his servitude as an example. We hear that Jesus is the suffering servant, right? Not only did he suffer for us, but he served us, okay? And we see that. It says, "Yet it shall not be so among you, but whoever desires to become great among you, let him be your servant." And this is Jesus' response to the disciples competing in Matthew along the same night, the Last Supper, about who was going to be the greatest. Okay? And Jesus set them in their place by telling them this, and we'll have a little bit of a taste of that when we go through today's passage. The focus for today is going to be that Jesus showed salvation and continuing forgiveness in performing the foot washing. Okay? And so we'll talk about that. And it says Jesus, and to Peter's credit, because we're going to see what Peter responds on this, and Jesus tells him and said to him, "What I am doing you do not understand now, but you will know after this." So this is a message for us today that the disciples didn't necessarily get until after Jesus' resurrection. And we're going to explain that today in the primary passage. Okay, so I'm going to start. I'm going to do things a little bit different. We're going to go through the 17 verses of the foot washing passage. I am going to point out the high points as I read these verses. I'm going to read through the verses that are the Peter interaction without commentary, because I'm going to come back to them after we finish reading the whole passage. So I'm going to hope I can keep you guys with me on this, but I'm going to explain, because in order to really understand the interaction that Jesus had with Peter during the foot washing, you have to understand the foot washing. So I want to kind of get you in a mindset of what the foot washing, what the details surrounding it are, so that you can better understand the primary message in today's sermon. Okay, so reading, you might have better luck if you turn to John chapter 13 yourself, because if you want to think, wait, what did he say? You'll have the whole passage in front of you. So starting in John chapter 13, verse 1, it says, "Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come that he should depart from this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end." Okay, so Jesus, the preparatory point of the foot washing, is where John's telling us the current situation that Jesus is in. John chapter 13, all the way to the end of John, or to chapter, I want to say 19, but John devotes about almost half his gospel to Christ last week, and he devotes about 3 chapters to the last night and his crucifixion. Okay, and so John is making sure we're clear that this feast of the Passover, that Jesus knew that his hour had come. This was his last night on earth, okay, before he was crucified. And he knew that his hour had come and that he should depart from this world, meaning he was going to be going back to the Father, and we'll see that. And he had loved his own who were in the world. He loved them to the end. He never stopped loving them, okay? He loved his own, those that were accepted of him, because we're going to see a little bit problem, a little bit of drama in the foot washing that I'll explain when we get there. But he loved his own who were in the world, and he loved them to the end. So therefore, in supper, the Last Supper being ended, the devil having already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him. So we already know at this point that Judas had gone and met with the high priest and the priesthood and the religious leaders of the time, and they paid him 30 pieces of silver to betray Jesus, to find a time when he could call on them to come and arrest Jesus because they wanted to get rid of Jesus, okay? And so this is an aspect. Judas is at the Last Supper, but we are again setting the scene here that Judas Iscariot, the devil having already put it into the heart of him to betray him, he was a participant of this next passage, okay? And Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hand, and that he had come from God and was going to God, we'll see, but he had come from God, so we know that John is reiterating his deity. He came from God, and he was going back to God because he was going to be ascending up into heaven, and we would see that towards the end of the Gospel and the beginning of Acts. So he rose from supper, Jesus did. He rose from supper and laid aside his garments, took a towel and girded himself. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel with which he was girded. Okay, this is the foot wash. This is the action that Jesus is getting ready to do. Okay, and think about it. Everybody wore sandals back then. Okay, you marched around the streets and the sidewalk. Well, they didn't have sidewalks, so your feet got pretty nasty. I mean, and think about it. If you try to muck out a horse stall in sandals, what do you think condition your feet would be in, right? You'd be pretty nasty feet. And it was such a thing that when you were a guest, they were supposed to provide somebody to wash your feet before dinner. One of the reasons being they sat at low tables a lot of times for dinner, so their feet were pretty close to the food, so you didn't want smelly, nasty, dirty feet right next to your food, right? And so even to the point that it was the lowliest task you could assign somebody to do. In fact, they usually had a servant do it, and I read some people that in the Mishnah, which is the Jewish, the Mishnah is the Jewish form of the oral traditions that Christ gave them. Okay, but the Jews, Orthodox Jews, still live by this. But anyway, they're saying that early on, the Jews thought it was such a lowly task they would not even assign it to one of their Jewish slaves. They would assign it to a Gentile slave. That's how low down this thing that Jesus is getting ready to do, right? This thing that Jesus did. He's washing their dirty, nasty feet. How's that for humility? How's that for being humble, right? Is that this thing that he's debasing himself to the point that he's washing their dirty, nasty feet, okay? I'm going to read these without, and I'll get to the commentary later. Then he came to Simon Peter, and Peter said to him, Lord, are you washing my feet? Jesus answered and said to him, what I am doing you do not understand now, but you will know after this. Peter said to him, you shall never wash my feet. Jesus answered him, if I do not wash you, you have no part with me. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. Jesus said to him, he who is bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean. You are clean, but not all of you, for he knew who would betray him. Therefore he said, you are not all clean. So when he had washed their feet, taken his garment, sat down, he said to them, here's the lesson. Here's the thing he's wanting them to get. Here's what the disciples are supposed to get immediately from this lesson. Because the thing that we're going to talk to next is what we can see in hindsight and what the disciples could see in hindsight, but they don't see it yet. So this is the lesson that Jesus is showing them now. He says, do you know what I have done to you? I've cleaned your dirty, nasty feet. Think about it, 12 people. He washed 12 people's dirty, nasty feet. I like to think that he needed more than one towel, right? So that's what he said. Do you know, you call me teacher and Lord, and you say, well, for so I am. So you recognize I am Lord. You recognize I am your teacher. And what's interesting is I find it that he uses this, specifically teacher, because it's a teaching moment. He's wanting to show them why he did this, okay? So you call me teacher and Lord. You say, well, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you should do as I have done to you. So here's where we get a little theological. Why don't we do foot washings as part of communion? Some denominations do that actually. Why don't we do foot washings routinely? Why isn't it one of the ordinances, and the ordinances we practice are baptism and communion, why isn't it one of the ordinances? Well, because there's a few reasons. One, this is the only place in the Bible, or the only place, slow down, it's the only gospel that lists the foot washing that Jesus did. So we only have it one time in Scripture. Secondly, we have no record in the Bible of the disciples ever doing it again. Okay? And so along that line, what it is that there's an example, there's a lesson to be learned here. The act is not the lesson is in the act, if that makes sense. Just much like when they talked to Jesus about how he wasn't honoring the Sabbath, he said the Sabbath was made for the man, not the man for the Sabbath. So the issue isn't the act of washing the feet, the issue is serving one another, being a servant. So he says, for I have given you an example that you should do as I have done. Humble yourself, make a servitude of yourself to others. That's what Jesus is showing them. Okay? Because it continues in the next verse. It says, most assuredly, and remember, I don't know how many of you will remember this, but most assuredly is kind of like the pay attention. In the King James, it was verily, verily. Okay? This, most assuredly, pay attention. This is a point I'm trying to sink home to you. Get it, understand it, and abide by it. He says, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is he who is sent greater than he who sent him. Christ is God, but he's not greater than God. Okay, God's the Father who sent him. He's not greater than him. It says, if you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. So Jesus, who then is the master and teacher and Lord of them, did this, and they are not above him. They need to follow his example. And the example is they need to be servants to each other and to others. Okay? So I'm going to do what I do every once in a while now, is I want to show you the so what ahead of time. Now that we read that and we're getting ready to get into the primary passage about Peter, is the so what? Is once we are saved by the blood of Christ, bathed, we are his. However, we do still need to ask forgiveness of our day-to-day sins, i.e. washed. So bathed and washed in this passage are two different things, and we'll explain that as we go along. So then let's jump back to verse 6 as we get a little bit deeper into what the exchange that Jesus and Peter had. He says, Then he came to Simon, Jesus came to Simon Peter, and Peter said to him, okay, before I show what you said, I like what this guy said, this Reverend Jake Hooker, about what he said about Peter in the Gospels. I find it humorous and applicable. It says, one of the fun things about reading through the Gospels is that you're always holding your breath whenever Peter speaks. Right? The moment he begins to talk, you're nervous. Because either he's going to say something incredibly embarrassing or quite profound. Okay? There's no middle ground. It's one or the other. And I like to think this passage is a little bit middle ground, and I'll explain that as we go through. Okay? So again, and Peter said, Lord, are you washing my feet? Okay? Before Christ did it, we read the whole story, but Jesus is going around, and now he's at Peter, and he's getting ready to take Peter's sandals off, or the night had already been off, but he's getting ready to wash, and Jesus answered. He says, what I am doing you do not understand now, but you will know after this. This is my point. This is a lesson for them post-resurrection. This is a lesson for us, and so now we're going to talk about it. Okay? How many recognize this guy? Okay, he might be a little bit chubbier in this picture because I kind of had to stretch it. Okay, Rod Serling. How many of you remember what Rod Serling's famous for? Okay, I'm not going to try. I tried, but I can't pull it off, so I'm not going to try to do it in his voice. But he said, "You are about to enter another dimension, a dimension not only of sight and sound, but of," he said, mind. But we are going to go into another dimension, not of sound, but of sound and spirit. Okay. Because we are entering the symbolic zone. All right, so here we go. Peter said to him, still Peter talking, after Jesus said, you don't understand this now, so maybe you should zip your lip a little bit, Peter. Okay, because you don't understand what I'm doing now, but you will later. Okay, I guess Peter thought it was later. 5 seconds had passed, And he says, you shall never wash my feet. And Jesus said, before we see what Jesus said, remember, Jesus just told him, Peter, you're not going to understand this now, but you will know after this. And so Peter then Jesus answered him and said, I do not wash you, slow down. I go away for 2 weeks without preaching, and then I come back and I'm preaching fast again. So, it says, if I do not wash you, you have no part with me. Okay? This wash, specifically, and we'll see it more in the next verses, is like washing your hands or washing your feet. It's washing a part of you. Bathe, that we're going to see, is doing a whole body wash. Okay? Taking a shower, taking a bath. That's the difference between these words. So Simon Peter said to him, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. He's like, if I'm the one to show you, I want to be part of you. Okay, so don't just wash my feet, wash all of me. I need the whole thing, right? You ever see these things at advertising car washes? Well, Peter didn't want the basic level. He didn't want the super level. He wanted the deluxe level. He said, I want to be so part of you. I want you to clean everything. Okay, give me the undercarriage wax job, right, on the car that doesn't do anything. But anyway, and I'd like to say too, this was the best image I could use for this example, but who gets a car wash for under $9 anymore? Right? Okay, so anyway, Peter's saying, I want the deluxe level, not just my feet, but wash my hands and my head. I want to be clean. And so then Jesus said to him, remember, we are in the symbolic zone, okay? So let's pull the symbolism out of this passage that he is saying. Jesus said to him, he who is bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean. Okay? What Jesus is saying here, the imagery we have here, is Peter's already one of them. The disciples, except Judas, and we'll get there, are one of him. They've already accepted that he's Lord and teacher. They've already recognized he is God in the flesh. He is God with us. Okay? They already recognize that he is that, and so they have been bathed. He who is bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean. Wash his feet. What are you talking about? When we walk out of this door, we start getting the world on us. Even when we're in these doors, because we're in the world, right? But when we go out these doors, we get the world on us. Okay? The cruddy, nasty, sinful, spiteful, angry at life in general world that we go into, and that clings to us a little bit. Okay? It clings to us in a manner that we sin. Right? We're cleaned. We've taken a shower that morning. We go out there and we still get mud. Josie hates it when I get ready for the day and I go out and I'm in my, she'd like to say, more pastorish clothes. And then I go out and start doing some type of work on something. She goes, don't do that in those clothes. I'm like, oh, I'm going to be fine. I just got to do this. And sure enough, the wisdom of Josie, I go and I get one little grease spot or something on my shirt, and then now that becomes a work shirt though too. But problem is I have more work shirts than I have good shirts. So anyway, no matter how hard you try, I went out clean. I was like, I'm just going to do this. It's just going to get my hands. I'll wash my hands, right? But no, it got to get on my shirt. Okay? So this idea is you only need to wash off the crud that you're bringing with you from the world. You don't need to be re-saved. You don't need to take another shower. Sometimes, depending on what you're doing, you need a shower, but then that breaks my analogy and Christ's symbology here. So, stay on track, Mike. Okay, so the idea is you just need to wash his feet because he is already completely clean. And he says that right here. You are clean. He tells Peter directly, you are clean. But he says to Peter, but not all of you. Now we could get into the depths of the story and the rest of the dinner and everything else, but we already know, because we know the end point, it was Judas that he's talking about. Okay, so we're coming into the to the final verse here. It says, for he knew who would betray him, therefore he said, you are not all clean. So, he already knew that Judas was not his true follower. That's why getting baptized, getting your foot washed, doing these things, that's why they're symbolic, because they don't really do anything for your soul. They don't really save you. If you go through the motions of following Christ but don't accept Him as your Lord and Savior, you are not all clean, right? You have to accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior and follow Him, do as He commands you. Jesus said, if you love Him, do His commandments. That is when you are clean. And so this action that Jesus is saying is that it's not really doing anything for you, except I'm trying to show you need to have a servant's heart. And I also need to show you that once you're saved, you're saved. But you need to get the crud off you that impacts you from the world and the dirt and the grime that you get, the sin that clings to you, and ask forgiveness for that, even though you are clean. Because we're in a sinful state, we lose fellowship with God. We don't lose our salvation, but we lose fellowship with Him. When you're in a state of sin that you're not wanting to correct and clean, and yeah, you might ask for forgiveness, but if you don't have the desire to change, your relationship with God is impacted because they can't exist in the same room. That's why Christ died for us, to cleanse us of all sin. So we have to constantly say, Christ, clean me, clean that sin off me, help me not to do it anymore, help me to keep it off of me, and help me to be more like you. And so that leads me back to my so what? It says, once we are saved by the blood of Christ, we've been bathed, okay? Full body wash, okay? The super deluxe car wash mentality. We are His. There's no changing that. However, we still need to ask forgiveness of our day-to-day sins. And I'm telling you, you will sin. As long as you're on this earth, you will still sin. I've had some people try to say that they misread a certain passage and think, well, now that I'm a Christian, I don't sin. Well, good for you, but you're wrong. You just sinned right there because you lied. But anyway, it's that we are still saved, but we still sin, and we need to be washed. We don't need to be bathed again, okay? So we don't lose that salvation. And then the point to ponder is, do you remember to seek forgiveness from Christ daily? Do you include it as part of your daily prayer? Because we should. We should be praying for the sins of ignorance that we do, that we didn't know where we do, because I guarantee you did something wrong yesterday that you shouldn't have done, that you may not even be aware of, but maybe your husband or your child or your mom or your dad, they know. They may have let it go by, but, you need to ask forgiveness because we are sinful creatures. We're still going to sin. It's part of our process. That's why I really love the ACTS, A-C-T-S, acronym for prayer. Adoration, okay? Worship God, adoration, adore God for who He is, adore Him for the great creation He has made for us. The rain, the whole rain cycle, evaporation, rivers going back to the sea, clouds forming, coming. God designed that, okay? God did that. Okay? And then contrition. I really like the word contrition, but if that's too big of a word for you, confess is also a word. Okay? Confess. Make sure. The reason why I like contrition, I've said this in the past, is because it seems I can confess, oh, sorry, I did that. But if there's no real heart change, then that's not really getting forgiveness. That's confessing, but it's not really recognizing. Contrition is that act of, ooh, I blew it, I'm sorry. And then thanksgiving, being thankful for everything God gives us. And then supplication. Then we ask the things that we want to seek for others and for ourselves. So there's this thing is that we should be seeking forgiveness for our daily sins. It's part of our relationship that we build with God. It's part of who we are when we are Christians, to have and recognize He's not just our bud. Not in the manner of like, hey bud, no. It's a reverent, wow, you're my older brother, you're my savior, I'm part of you, but you did so much to get me there. Okay? So we need to recognize that we still need to be washed, but not necessarily bathed. Okay? And then for next week, continue memorizing 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 9 and 10. And then read Philippians chapter 2. That's going to be the primary passage I'll be in for our Thanksgiving message next week. So you might want to read ahead to Philippians chapter 2. Okay?